In the early 1980s, Black Flag was the most dangerous band in America. They were the masters of speed, intensity, and pure, unfiltered aggression. If you went to a show in 1982, you expected a sonic assault that moved at 100 miles per hour. They were the kings of hardcore punk, and their fans were a cult of high-speed chaos. But in 1984, something strange happened. The lights went down, the feedback started screaming, and the fastest band in the world suddenly stopped running. Instead of the lightning-fast riffs the crowd was begging for, guitarist Greg Ginn began to play slow. Painfully slow. The music didn't just decelerate, it became heavy, sludge-filled, and suffocating. The fans were furious. They started throwing things at the stage. They shouted for the band to speed up, to go back to the way things were. But the band didn't budge. They leaned into the distortion and the dragging tempo, playing songs that felt like they were sinking in quicksand. This wasn't a mistake. It was a calculated act of musical terrorism against their own audience. Black Flag had decided to commit career suicide to find something deeper, darker, and much more influential. They didn't know it yet, but in those long, agonizing minutes of slow-motion noise, they weren't just killing punk rock. They were planting the seeds for a revolution that would eventually conquer the world under a different name, grunge. While the rest of the rock world in the 1980s was chasing the warm, expensive glow of vacuum tube amplifiers and professional studio racks, Greg Ginn was doing something almost sacrilegious. He wasn't interested in the perfect tone or the polished production of the era. Instead, he embraced a sound that most professional guitarists at the time considered thin, harsh, and outright ugly. Ginn's primary weapon was a transparent plastic Don Armstrong guitar, and his amplification choice was even more unconventional. Solid-state power. At a time when every guitar hero was hauling Marshall stacks. Black Flag was using solid-state gear that most musicians avoided because it sounded sterile. But when pushed to its absolute limit at high volumes, that sterile sound transformed. It didn't provide a smooth, creamy distortion. It created a jagged, cold, and massive wall of noise that felt like a punch to the chest. This was the technical birth of what we now call sludge. It was a complete rejection of the high-end gear culture. They didn't have a team of engineers or $1 million budget. They had cheap distortion pedals, reliable but unglamorous solid-state heads, and a relentless DIY work ethic. This dirty technical approach proved a point that resonated with a new generation of musicians. You didn't need $10,000 of equipment to sound powerful. By stripping away the vanity of the equipment, Black Flag created a texture that was thick, muddy, and heavy. It wasn't about the beauty of the note. It was about the weight of the sound. This raw, unpolished technical blueprint was exactly what a small group of kids in the Pacific Northwest were waiting for. A way to make music that sounded as gray and heavy as the weather they lived in every day. Far from the sunny beaches of California, in the rain-soaked logging towns of Washington State, the seeds of a new sound were beginning to sprout. In places like Aberdeen and Montesano, the weather was gray, the economy was dying, and the isolation was absolute. For the restless teenagers living there, the high-speed, optimistic energy of traditional punk didn't fit their reality. They needed something that sounded the way their lives felt, heavy, slow, and frustrated. A local band called the Melvins, led by the frizzy-haired Buzz Osborne, became the high priests of this new slow-motion noise. They took the blueprint Black Flag had left behind and pushed it even further, making the music heavier and more repetitive. Among the small circle of outsiders following the Melvins was a skinny, quiet kid named Kurt Cobain. The connection wasn't a coincidence. In a legendary moment of rock history, Buzz Osborne drove a young Kurt Cobain to see Black Flag during that polarizing 1984 tour. While the rest of the crowd was booing and throwing bottles because the music was too slow, Kurt was transfixed. He didn't see a band failing. He saw a band that had the courage to be ugly and difficult. For Kurt, this was a revelation. He realized that the power of a song wasn't in its speed, but in its weight. The sludge he heard that night became the DNA of the early Washington scene. You can hear it in the deep, muddy riffs of Nirvana's debut album, Bleach. It was a fusion of punk's anger and the crushing weight of Black Sabbath. Without that night in a sweaty, hostile club watching Black Flag crawl through their set, the world would have never heard the heavy, distorted soul of the grunge revolution. To understand why this dirty sound was so revolutionary, you have to look at what was happening on the charts in the mid-1980s. The airwaves were dominated by hair metal. Bands like MTLE Crew, Poison, and Rat were the kings of the industry. Their sound was the definition of excess, multi-million-dollar recording budgets, layers of digital reverb, and guitars that sounded like polished chrome. This was the era of the Super Strat and the massive rack-mounted effects units. Everything was designed to be bright, fast, and perfect. The production was so clean, it felt synthetic. To the music industry, this was the peak of professional success. But to a growing underground of disillusioned fans, it felt fake. It was a world of spandex and hairspray that had nothing to do with the grit of real life. The sludge movement was the ultimate middle finger to that entire industry. While the Sunset Strip was obsessed with looking like movie stars and sounding like machines, the underground was leaning into the noise. They didn't want the shimmer, they wanted the sludge. They traded the expensive neon lights for the dim, flickering bulbs of basement shows. This wasn't just a difference in musical taste. It was a class war. On one side, you had the high-gloss, high-budget fantasy of the Los Angeles scene. On the other, you had a bunch of kids with used gear and a sound that felt like a punch to the jaw. This friction created a vacuum in the music world. The more the industry pushed for perfection, the more the audience craved something raw and honest. The stage was being set for a collision, and the dirty sound of the underground was a ticking time bomb waiting to explode under the feet of the giants. By the early 90s, the ticking time bomb finally detonated. The high-gloss, multi-million-dollar world of hair metal didn't just fade away. It was wiped off the map almost overnight. The catalyst was a single distorted chord that sounded like it came from a garage, not a laboratory. When Nirvana released Nevermind in 1991, the world finally heard the polished version of the sludge that Black Flag had pioneered years before. Kurt Cobain had taken that slow, heavy, and ugly DNA and injected it with a sense of melody that the mainstream couldn't ignore. But at its core, Smells Like Teen Spirit was still built on the same foundation. Cheap distortion, heavy riffs, and a complete lack of interest in being perfect. The era of playing slow and dirty had become the new global standard for excellence. The impact was permanent. The music industry stopped looking for the next guitar virtuoso with a perm and started looking for the next kid in a flannel shirt with a beat-up Mustang guitar. Record labels scrambled to sign any band that sounded like they practiced in a basement. The dirty sound didn't just win, it redefined what it meant to be a rock star. It proved that authenticity was the most valuable currency in music. Looking back, the evolution from Black Flag's polarizing tours to the top of the Billboard charts is a reminder of a simple truth in rock history. True innovation doesn't usually happen in a high-end studio with a massive budget. It happens when a band is brave enough to be hated, to use wrong equipment, and to play exactly the way they feel, no matter how slow or sludge-filled it may be. The mistake that started in a hostile club in 1984 ended up saving rock and roll for a whole new generation.